Hello. So, lately I got back to reading and I picked up this book by Leo Tolstoy. And the name of the book is The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And it's a classic book. And personally, I wouldn't recommend this book to anybody else because it's a book which was written, I think, about 100 years ago, probably 130 years or so. And it's written from a point which is very depressing or so. And you can imagine that, like, the kind of writing he has if you know something about him. Or maybe you could do a quick search and you'll probably know about him. And there's a very fascinating point he makes about people and everybody else around a person who's dying. And to first introduce, okay, what this book is about. So in this book, Tolstoy talks about a man whose life was mostly simple, mostly ordinary. He had some family issues, and he thinks it's mostly terrible, which is probably not the case if you actually read it from a third person views or so. And he climbs the social ladders, he buys a really nice house, and he tries to decorate it with like all the fancy stuff that you can think about, the antiques, the drapes, and everything else. And from Tolstoy's point of view, he thinks that even after receiving everything else, or let's say being very rich, he just looks like every other person or so. So just to, let's say, go through the line what Tolstoy talks about here, it is, but these were essentially all the things that appeal to all the people who are not actually rich, but who wants to look rich, though all they manage to do is look like each other. The plants, the rugs, the bronzes, anything which seems dark or gleaming, and everything that all people of a certain class affect so as to be like all other people of a certain class or so. And for me, it seems like a very interesting point because even after hundreds of years, if you consider that the book was written around 1900s or so, we still face the same kind of dilemma, right? Or we still see the same things in our society. For example, that consider a person that you probably know, maybe on Instagram or anything else, maybe an influencer or somebody you know from your, let's say, family or so, or some far friends or so. You would see that we have this trend of same kind of appearance wise. So people are getting the same buccal fat removal. You would probably see like a very sharp jawline or something, and literally no, let's say, fat hair or so. And they have same kind of teeth, like it's very straight, it's very wide or so. And then they have these apartments which look like it is a luxury apartment, but at the same time it's very minimalist because you have these big rugs, you have these huge L-shaped sofas, and then you have like a 52-inch or 70-inch screen or so. And then they wear the same kind of clothing, and then they have these watches, etc., etc. And it makes a very similar point which was made by Rene Girard, which is called the mimetic desire. So in the theory, he talks about like the concept of the human desires is not very autonomous, or it's not our own. Rather, we want the things merely because we see others desiring or possessing the same things. So, for example, he makes the point that uh, all human desire imitates the desires of others. And this is almost without awareness. So, that's a point about our subconscious, or so, for example, that, okay, it's a very good thing about marketing as well, or a very bad thing about marketing as well. You could say that imagine that all of the desires or all of the things that you crave or so are basically the things that you have subconsciously seen beforehand or so. So, for example, if you are going on a morning run or something, or if you're going to the office or so, and you see some people getting a good piece of cake or so or something, well, you could say that because you're a human, you have this desire to eat something sweet or something, or you need a coffee or something in the morning. But the exact idea of that cake with the layers, with the cream and everything else is probably what you have seen in an advertisement or somebody on the ad or something. So it's a very similar concept if you think about it. And this also brings me to the concept that what actually differentiates a person, when we talk about this person, which is the death of Ivan Ilyich, Ivan only becomes a real individual on his deathbed, which is basically the end of the story or so. That when he's on his deathbed after, let's say, having all the stuff or so, and because he's going through a serious illness, I'm not going to ruin the book in case you're going to read it about, but imagine like a book where it's talk about a person who has achieved a lot of things, but at the same time now he's going through a big health issue or so. And he thinks on his deathbed that what are the things that he has done wrong. And at that point there is a person, uh, I forgot his name actually, it's in the end or so, but let's call this person Gerald or something, okay? And uh, this person is basically a servant in his house who has no status to perform for. And this is the only authentic character that Ilyich feels like is his whole life or so, because he feels like everybody else around him is pretending kind of. So you have this kind of thing where the self cannot be purchased or so. And how, for example, we are looking for the things, or we are desiring the things that we see across our whole society or so. It could be a lifestyle creep because, for example, you were earning, let's say, 50,000 or so per year or so. Now you have 100,000 or so. And you were driving, let's say, a Toyota Camry or something else, let's say. And now you have a desire to buy the Tesla 3 or something, or you want to get this SUV, you want to get that 4x4. So are those the things that you actually need or something, or actually want, or is it basically you want those things because you're, let's say, molded into this structure or so? And uh, this also brings me to the point of like older times or so, because this is not a very new concept if you think about it, but I feel like these were the same things which were a symbol of class or so in olden time as well. For example, people used to have big libraries or so, but you can assume that nobody's reading all the 2000 books there. Of course, people used to like reading or so, and it was a signal as well. But consider this thing, okay? All of the skills that we used to have back then, which were like a symbol of class, or for example, you have learning a new language or so, playing a new instrument or so, and having some kind of opinion about opera because you are going it too much or so, or you just like. And at that time, it seemed very admirable, right? Because these are the things which were setting you apart or so. But at the same time, for now, if you think about it, that anything that you actually want, for example, and any car that you want to buy, any watch that you want to buy, these are the things that you can just go ahead and buy something, right? Imagine you want to buy a really nice table or so, but now at your hand you have like, okay, I can just look up on Insta, or I can just search on Google, and I can just call the handyman or something, and they will build me a good, let's say, a whole good table for my dinner place or my office or so. But back then it was like, okay, if you had some kind of these skills like learning language or so or something, it was a bit harder, you know? And it was supposed to be a class symbol for those people or so. And I'm 100% sure that they mocked each other in that era as well. I think there are some plays by people actually describing that people who got rich or so after industrialization and so, and how they were different from old school money or so, or people who were noble or so. And uh, even from learning perspective or so, uh, if you think about it, like these are the statements also that you would relate with the out of touch CEO statements or so. So some of them came from a rich background or so, and some of them made so much money that they started losing touch of the reality or so. And you could think about the same billionaires lecturing people, oh, you are not working hard enough or so, or you should just stop buying those cafes or something, or like coffees and stuff. And then you also have a very good example of that. You now have a lot of YouTubers on the internet. So I really like tech and stuff, okay? And I see a lot of videos of them from all the tech YouTubers, like big tech YouTubers, small tech YouTubers or so. And there is this distinction where you see that people who have millions of subscribers or so, or have a very rich background, they think about a middle class as a very different range or so. So for example, imagine if you see a review of a mobile phone or a smartphone or so. A lot of YouTubers talk about a middle, or let's say mid-range phones from $600 to $800 or so now, okay? This concept is very crazy for the people who are living outside of this bubble or so, because to me a mid-range phone would be like $200 $300 or so, even if I become rich or so. At least I hope so, that I keep these kind of virtues or whatever this is. But for them, a mid-range phone they're talking about is $600 to $800 or so. So you can see that how this change in class happens, or how change in taste and everything else happens. Because for example, a company now is selling you a phone which says, okay, this phone is worth enough $700 or so, and these are the reasons or so. And these YouTubers, or like a person who has a lot of money, is like, okay, that makes sense for me or so. And then you compare it to some other cheaper phone or so, or some other brand, and you're like, oh, that brand must be cheap because, for example, it's not worth the value, or it's much cheaper or so, or some part must be cheaper, even though it's the same company who are selling the same parts to all other companies as well. So not to stretch these videos a lot, but to, let's say, reflect on the point that I was trying to make is that in the end, after acquiring, let's say, a lot of money or something, or let's say not even a lot of money, but it's like just a lifestyle creep, like upgrading yourself or so, you start imagining this kind of class, or you started imagining these kind of desires, which is like not your inherent desires or so. It's the things that you saw somewhere, or that you, let's say, maybe people talked about this thing as a symbol or so. So the point I was trying to make is from Tolstoy book as well, that he says that the self can't be purchased, okay, because the self is what exists even before consumption or so. And I don't think he's making this point explicitly or so, but he's talking about it from the perspective of Ilyich, who was a person who was, let's say, poor or middle class or so, and he went through the stages of becoming rich or so, but he still feels, in the end, he actually realizes that did he actually lead a good life, or did he lead the life which he felt like was around him or so. So it's something that was I found interesting, because it's been a lot of time that I took this book to read or so. Probably not the best book, I would say, for other people to read or so, because I feel like the end, somehow I don't like it. I was expecting more from this book. But yeah, I wanted to understand, or let's say I wanted to ask you people, like, what are your thoughts on this book or so, and if you would like to read, or if you have similar kind of observations around you or so. So that's it for the first video. Thank you.